It's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In last week's blog, I talked about what are the outcomes for patients at home on ventilation and tracheostomy. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to answer a question that we get quite frequently from our clients and also potential clients and people who have loved ones in intensive care. So the question this week is, what is long-term home ventilation? So let's look at this in more detail. So generally speaking, long-term home ventilation can be broken down into a few categories. Let's look at them in more detail. So it can be broken down into long-term invasive ventilation with tracheostomy, can be broken down into long-term ventilation with non-invasive ventilation such as CPAP or BiPAP with a mask. Both forms of ventilation, generally speaking, in a hospital require admission to specialist areas such as intensive care ICU or to other higher acuity areas such as high dependency units. It usually also requires the skills of highly specialized doctors and nurses to look after patients that are ventilator dependent. So those specialized skills are usually the skills of ICU doctors, ICU nurses, and so forth. At the end of the day, invasive mechanical ventilation with tracheostomy as well as non-invasive ventilation with CPAP or BiPAP are forms of life support that can't be managed by amateurs but need to be managed by professionals and highly skilled ICU or pediatric ICU nurses in those environments. When it comes to mechanical long-term ventilation, it is often challenging to map out the pathway for patients that are stuck in ICU or pediatric ICU ventilator dependent. The good news is that with such a highly specialized service like intensive care at home, a much earlier discharge home from ICU or pediatric ICU is possible. Previous and outdated paradigms in intensive care or pediatric intensive care suggested that a patient in ICU is having two options. Number one, they recover, leave intensive care and go to a hospital ward, or number two, they die. That's a fairly bleak and also black and white approach and not in line with current trends and realities. Even that more and more lives are saved in ICU or pediatric ICU and given that some of those patients do require long-term invasive ventilation with tracheostomies, those patients stay in ICU or pediatric ICU for much longer than necessary, and now those patients can continue care and treatment at home instead. Our service, Intensive Care at Home, takes those patients home, whether on mechanical ventilation with tracheostomy or whether they need mechanical non-invasive ventilation such as BiPAP or CPAP. We do this by providing a third-party accredited intensive care substitution service by sending ICU, PICU nurses into the home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This gives our clients and their families choice to continue care and treatment at home, and it enables our clients to leave intensive care or pediatric intensive care to improve their quality of life and in some instances quality of end of life at home. It is a much better option than staying in intensive care long term. It improves our clients and their families' quality of life and again in some instances quality of end of life. Long-term mechanical home ventilation can be broken down further into the following options, and they also present our service options. So the first one is quality of life nursing services for mechanically ventilated adults with tracheostomy as a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care. And we have the same available for children, so quality of life nursing services for mechanically ventilated children with tracheostomy as a genuine alternative to pediatric intensive care. We also have quality of end-of-life nursing services for mechanically ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy as a genuine alternative to intensive care. What that means is basically we are providing end-of-life or palliative care services at home for mechanically ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies, and we have taken many patients home from intensive care or pediatric intensive care to have an end-of-life situation that the families and the patients want. Last but not least, we also have quality of life nursing services for adults and children requiring non-invasive mask ventilation such as BiPAP or CPAP, or also high-flow oxygen therapy at home. Part of our services is also to wean patients off ventilation and tracheostomy at home if the patient's condition allows. To give you an even better overview of what we exactly do, please have a look at our case studies on our website intensivecareathome.com. Furthermore, I also like to mention on a bigger picture level, we know that long-term ventilated adults and children in ICU or pediatric ICU want to leave those environments as quickly as possible. Home care is simply the better option, as simply you can't beat home. You just can't. So, moreover, ICU and pediatric ICU beds are in high demand. Therefore, ICUs or pediatric ICUs often have an interest in sending out their patients whenever possible. And with intensive care at home, it is possible. Besides, ICU and pediatric ICU beds cost $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day. And intensive care at home is about 50% of that cost. Hence, we're providing a win-win situation for all stakeholders. We provide our clients and their families with a much improved quality of life or quality of end of life, and we're cutting the cost of the most expensive hospital bed to 50% of that cost. Thanks for watching. So if you want to find out how we can help you to get your loved one out of intensive care, including palliative care, we can also help you to get your loved one out of long-term acute care or out of a nursing home. Or if you find that you have insufficient support for your loved one at home on a ventilator, please contact us at one of the numbers on the top of the website, or simply send me an email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. That's Patrick, P-A-T-R-I-K, @intensivecareathome.com with your queries or concerns. Also, have a look at our career section. We are currently hiring ICU and pediatric ICU nurses for clients in the Melbourne metropolitan area, northern suburbs, Mornington Peninsula, and in South Gippsland, Victoria. We are an NDIS, TAC, and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. Also, have a look at our range of full service provisions. We have also been part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program for innovative healthcare companies late last year. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll see you again next week in another update.